Welcome to the Mom CEO podcast. I'm your host, Esther Roach. Join me as we explore the dynamic intersection of motherhood and entrepreneurship. From the challenges to the triumphs, we're here to unravel it all. Get ready for insightful conversations, practical wisdom, and a whole lot of inspiration. Let's embark on this empowering journey together. Hello, and welcome to the Mom CEO podcast. I'm your host, Esther Roche, and today I'm joined by Jocelyn. Hi, Jocelyn, and welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me today.
Now you're very welcome. For the benefit of our audience, if you could please introduce yourself and what you do.
Yeah. So I'm Jocelyn, and I like to call myself a cultivator of curiosity and creativity in the human experiment, and that's because I have a lot of different things I do. First of all, I unschool my three kids, so from ages 7 to 15, and that's kind of my main gig. But I'm a soul art guide and a human design guide. A yoga nidra guide and Akashic Records guide. And I spent many years as an expressive art therapist intermodal, though I don't really work in that field, although I do, but I just wouldn't call it therapy now. So, yeah. And a lot of who I am has been shaped by a journey through grief. And although I've had lots of grief in my life, um, I had recently, I wouldn't say recently, but it is recently in 2021. At the end, I'm actually coming up on the 3-year anniversary. I lost my parents 7 days apart unexpectedly. And we lived with them and, unschooling and homeschooling, my whole family was around them 24/7. And we were very close, and I'm an only child. And so that has shaped a lot of the last almost 3 years of my life and really been, I hate to say it, but a beautiful gift. I mean, I had to look at it like, well, I'm not getting my parents back that this happened. And so I might as well get what I can out of this. So that's something that I've allowed it to shape a lot of what's been going on with me.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
I obviously I lost my parents quite young, so well, not quite young. I lost my dad when I was 16, and then I lost my mum about 11 years ago now. And it's almost like when you talk about grief, everybody reacts to it very differently. You know, what's been your journey like with the whole situation? Because obviously being an only child, there's that element, and then you have your own children. How has that impacted the family?
Yeah, so it is funny how everyone talks about grief. And when you talk about grief, or someone close to you loses somebody, right? And they're in a major grief, it's like you have to be really careful about your words because you don't want to hurt them and you don't want to do this. And there's so many things that people say. And if you live in a spiritual world, like for me, I've had to focus on, okay, I can still connect with them. And these things do happen. I might have called it in, or my soul might have called in this journey through grief, but you can't necessarily say that to anybody because they get very volatile sometimes when people are in the middle of grief. So it is something that you have to, it's like it's just dealt with kid gloves all the time. And it's hard because when you're in grief, it's like if someone just comes in and gives it to you, you can actually move through it in a much more easy way, easeful way. Um, but yeah, no, for me, it was I went through major shock because I was very close to my parents. Like I said, we lived with them, and they were second parents to my kids.
Mm.
So it was really an overwhelming experience for everybody. And it was during COVID. So all the COVID protocols made it a very, very um, traumatic experience. I'm pretty sure I have PTSD from it and I've been working through it, but it's like there were so many things that were held back, withheld, not being able to do things, not having choice in any matters. And so for me, and I think probably a lot of people who experience death during the COVID protocol things probably have very similar experience of feeling helpless in many ways. Um, and so I went into a shock and I totally let go of 4 or 5 months of my life. I don't remember it. And when I started to come out, I came out slowly. But as a mom, I know I was there. I just wrote a post about this on Substack about how I was like very out loud with, being here and being a mom to my kids, but like inside, I was like falling apart. Like I had these two personalities going on. I was like in a place where inside I just didn't even know who I was anymore. I was just this speck. Even though I had this smile on my face on the outside, right, trying to work with my kids because they were in massive grief and PTSD and all kinds of stuff as well. So it wasn't until I think maybe 4 or 5 months after that I started to crawl out. And when I crawled out, I had to do it so small steps. I
Mm.
had to go really small. I could only take pieces of my grief at a time. And I'm still taking pieces of my grief and working through it. I still have these moments where it just, and I probably will for the rest of my life, where it just washes over me, takes me downstream for a while. And I have found that it has brought me closer to my kids in a lot of ways because I didn't have the opportunity to not be vulnerable with them. I was just 100% vulnerable all the time. So they got to see me at my worst. I mean, at one point I was in the tub and I started to have this moment of, I don't know what I am or who I am. And I started crying and the water became freezing. My husband had to come get me out of, and they saw that. So they saw me absolutely go through, um, and there was no way to hide it. So in a way, I feel like it was a beautiful life lesson for them that it's absolutely okay to be that vulnerable and to be that much in a present moment of whatever's going on. So, yeah, grief has been, and all of my kids have gone through it differently. And that's one thing I constantly hear is when we're working through grief with kids that, oh, I didn't want to traumatize them with my trauma. And it's like, no, no, they need to see how real it is because they will experience, everyone's going to experience grief in their life at some point or another. And my kids just got it very young. And so it's like it's okay to be um in it and for them to see you in it and to see what being a human being is, and that we do have all of these facets. And as vulnerable as I was then, now I'm stronger. So they can see that kind of, spectrum of it,
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah.
and I think it allows them to feel it and them to heal through my vulnerability too. So it's really interesting. The journey of grief is different for everybody. Um, I just was at a place where I couldn't even stop it. It was just like I better start this because I'm not present. And it was scary for a while.
It must have been quite difficult, and especially with 7 years, like I'm saying to you, I lost my dad, and my mum was on her own for 17 years before she then passed away and left us. But it's kind of like to have two a week apart, that's
Yeah.
just something else. And you've mentioned something interesting as well there with the children, because funny enough, I was speaking to another guest yesterday, and they were mentioning about, they do let their children see them in their vulnerable state because sometimes I think as parents, we want to protect them. But at the same time, there are life lessons where certain things are going to happen in life. You can do so much, but I think it's nice to also equip them and prepare them for eventualities or things that can happen in life. Otherwise, they can't cope with them because they feel they have to be perfect, if that's the word. Everything has to be
Yeah.
perfect. There's no room for
Yeah.
mistake or room for, any of those things.
Well,
But
and how many kids do you know that don't want to hurt their parents? Or they hold on to. I mean, I was one of those kids as a teenager. I had lots of things going on that were not great. And I didn't want to tell my parents because I was an only child and I didn't want to let them down. How many kids do that, that they don't allow their parents to see? Not all kids, but a lot of kids do that. They don't want their parents to see them in the worst states, right? Like that happens all the time. I can just think back to how much I hid from my parents as a teenager when it's that time and relationships are going on and I'm in that middle of like, oh, where was my relationship, and I'm feeling like I'm nothing, right? And I would purposely lock myself in the bathroom and cry and like cry into towels so they wouldn't hear me because I was their only child. I was supposed to be the strongest, best, right? And even it's funny because even when I was in the hospital with my parents and my mom was dying and they brought my dad in and they didn't tell him anything, and they were together 51 years, so they just had their 51-year anniversary. And he was like in a glass box. They brought him in this plexiglass box over a wheelchair that had a door on it, so he couldn't even get up and lay with my mom. And he said and it was so telling. He said to me, He said, your mom is suffering. He's like, I can be angry, but I can't be sad. Right. And he was like getting ready to be really sad. And like, I can't do this. And it resonated with me to the point where I realized, and I had a lot of grief as a kid. I was like a 90s kid. That was a time when there were lots of drugs going around, and there were lots of deaths in my teens and my early 20s. And
Mm,
I realized at that time, my parents never, when every time, like my first experience was someone in high school who committed suicide when I was a freshman, and he, shot his head off. And I remember going to I was confused with like, well, why can't I see him in the coffin? Like, well, he shot his head off, right? But I was going through a lot, and I was trying to talk it out with my parents. And I
mm,
remember them saying, don't be sad. You weren't that close to him. You don't have to be sad, right? They didn't want to see the sadness in me.
yeah.
So when they died and that happened, I had to go through every grief. I had to go through every time I lost someone, like when I wasn't allowed to feel sad. And I had these major moments of just overwhelming sadness just bubbling up and coming out of me. Because for all those years, I was like, well, I can't be sad. And my dad literally said it in the hospital. And I didn't even start working with that till maybe a year later when I remembered that he said that. Because I was in shock. So I was taking it piece by piece. And when I remembered he said that, I was like, oh my God, that's my life. My parents never let me be sad. I wasn't supposed to be sad. They couldn't handle it. So how much of a gift is it to allow your kids to feel things, I mean, I had I mean, you could count the deaths, not even on two hands that I went through that I had to re-go through to be like, okay, I can be sad about this, you know?
Oh wow, it's interesting, like you say, with the trauma as well, because you've had to live with all those things that have happened and the things that happened in your early life, and only bring them out now, which is it's a long
Right.
time. What kind of
Yeah.
strategies? How have you managed to sort of keep yourself on track with everything, really?
Yeah, I don't think I had much of a choice. For me, I work with my parents, like wherever they are all the time. And as soon as I started coming out of it, my mom, I actually found this email because when your parents die so close together, everything has to be switched over 1,000 times, like first to the person, then to the, and it's crazy. So I was on email all the time, and I went on the email to finish something financial, and I noticed that my mom kept getting these human design things, and I'm pretty sure she was like, tap on this, go here, do that, do this. And
Mm,
so I immediately wanted to connect with her. So I went to one of these teachers on human design that she was really into. And I said, I have no money. I have nothing going on. I really need to be close to my mom right now. And so she let me take this program, and it kept me going for 6 months because it was a women's circle. So it connected me, like I'd have to be present in this women's circle with my human design, with my grief, um, for 6 months, 3 times a week. So that kept me on track for 6 months. And when that program ended, I was like, oh, I can't be on my own. Like, this is not okay. So
mm,
I went and found another human design teacher that I connected to. And I feel like my mom sent her to me. And I was like, okay. And I said, I love this program. It was so expensive. I'm like, I can't do it, but I need it. And she said, come and do it. And so I got to do that for another 6 months or another 4 or 5 months, whatever it was. And when that was ending, I was like, oh no, I can't do it on my own again. Like, this is not going to happen. And I ended up finding the Akashic Records. And I was really interested because I ended up in a past life where I was feeling massive grief. And it was like I almost got lost there. The everything bubbled up again. And so I called this woman to find out more about what I experienced. And she's like, you need to be an Akashic Records guide. Please do this. I tell you, my mother was like sending me in directions to keep moving my energy because the minute I stop,
mm,
and it was like I would just drown, right? I was like moving things and I was moving it forward, but it was still piece, like small piece by small
mm,
piece. So I ended up in that. And then after that Akashic Records training, it was like the next winter. And it was the first winter I was like aware. And I ended up in major panic attack style situations because my parents died from getting sick. So the first sniffle that happened, and that was when people started going back to school. So sniffles were everywhere.
mm,
And I would literally stay up looking at my kids, going, please don't die. Please don't die. And because I wasn't sleeping, because I was watching them, I would get super anxious and like it was getting worse. And then because it was getting worse, I wouldn't sleep. And because I wasn't sleeping, my anxiety was worse. And that's when I found Yoga Nidra. And then I allowed myself to go into a training for yoga nidra. So I just kept kind of making sure that I had something that checked me in, something that made me check in, that was like connected to me, that was still giving me a relationship to my body, whether it was human design, Akashic Records, yoga nidra, whatever it was, that I had something that if I went down and drowned for a week, next week I had something that was going to ask me to go deep. And I knew that I needed that. And my mom was providing it. All of this stuff was basically offered to me for free. I don't know how she did it, but she did it. And, and I would keep in that mode of, okay, I can drown for a week, but I have this coming up. And I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be authentic.
Yeah.
And doing that allowed me to continue my healing journey. And I know it's probably not something that everyone can do all the time, but having some kind of community or something that taps you back into who you are, even if it's once a month, can be an absolute um, gift. Gift that asks you questions, that gets something that gets you curious about, oh, okay, well, this is my human piece of my human design, or this is, I'm going to do this yoga nidra that's going to work into my subtle self, and I'm going to feel into my heart today.
Mm.
Right. And so it allowed me to not drown too far where I couldn't be pulled up again by those things that I was doing. That was really helpful. And
Mm.
then by the time I had gotten through that yoga nidra training, I was in a place where I didn't need it, but I still keep it. I still have it. I still have something that I go to every week. So I started doing the soul art training, and now I meet once a week with groups. And so I don't know if maybe it's a handicap at this point, but it's like something I need. Like I know intuitively that I need something that keeps me on track. And I don't know that not everybody is like that, but there's so many energies and so much grief going on around us in the house. And there's just so much that it helps me to remember who I am and what I'm going through, and it allows me to be present in me as well as present in the house. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's really important as well that you are taking care of you, because you're going to be no good to the family if you're not looking
Right.
at yourself and your well-being. Um, and I think sometimes as well we can be so hard on ourselves that we overlook that we also need to look at.
Yeah.
And with in respect of the children, because they're still fairly young,
Right.
how have they coped as well from there? And do they do some of the classes with you, or is it just mum and children, or how do you do it with them?
Yeah, well, so my youngest, who's 7, she was 4 when my parents died, and she was like, if you could have said there was soulmates, my dad and her would have been soulmates. Like I remember the first time my dad held her, I walked in on them, and or someone had walked in, I forget who it was, but he was just they were staring into each other's eyes, and he was like, I know this kid. I know this kid. They were that close. So my littlest still cries. You'll find her, you'll just be driving one day and she'll just be absolutely crying and like maybe even hiding herself because she doesn't want everyone to know she's crying, but she's absolutely open with how she feels. But um like she'll be like just crying out of nowhere.
Mm.
And so she still does that, and she still cries at night, and we talk a lot when dealing with grief in younger kids. I talk a lot about letting them have the magic. Let them have the magic. If they find a feather, let it be from the other side. If they find, oftentimes my daughter will say something like, "Oh, Pop did that because the lights went off." And I'll be like, "Yeah, he did. Yeah, I let her have the magic because it's important to her." And I believe it too anyways. But even if I didn't, I would let her have that magic. I wouldn't take that from her. And so that's like a really important piece to her.
Mhm.
And I also very much for her, I take out videos and photos, and oftentimes I tell her stories. Whereas my older 2 kids are, they're not that interested in the same way. Um, but my son, when he grieved, he just stopped. He stopped everything. I would say my dad was like his dad to him because my husband at the time was working so much. So it's almost like he lost a dad.
Mm.
And he went into a place of just eating and sleeping, and he like actually gained a ton of weight for the first 6 months, and then he took it all off. But
Mm.
it was like this way of him coping. And I knew my son is very, very empathetic. And all of the grief in the house, missing my parents in the house because we lived here, right? So it's like it was just so messy. I knew he just needed to take himself out. Like I know he started locking doors and just being in and going into like screens because I know that my grief was humongous.
Mm.
And my husband's grief was, and everyone's grief was humongous. And he just needed to be away from it. And I allowed him that. I kept an eye on his, like, on what he was in, as far as on the internet, but I just allowed that. He was not, when he started to get angry and he would start to like take things out. And I would start to, and that's when I started to talk to him about it. And I would say, "Oh, Pop will be proud of this of you," or and I in that way. But I really let him do his journey because there was nothing I could do. Like there was really nothing I could do but give him space. If I had pushed him, I think he would have just gone deeper in the hole. So that was him, you know. And he's actually coming out now and really, really beginning to embrace his life again and embrace emotions again.
Oh, wow. So quite
Yeah, and
important for all of you. Everybody's in the stage of sort of transitioning really and having, because they were part of your
yeah,
lives, and your family.
yeah,
You lived with them, which is a massive, massive change to the setup now.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and my oldest daughter, who's going to be 15, she she actually she ended up finding other avenues for her self to express. She got very into books and actually very into books about death. Not like nonfiction, but like fiction books about people dying. It was like almost like an obsession that she became into. And she started drawing a lot. And I noticed the kind of pieces she was drawing, and they were so emotional, right? And she's not one to be emotional. So just, for her, at one point, I was outside looking at the stars and she came out and I just told her how sad I was and I started crying and it allowed her to cry. But she doesn't really do that often and
Mm,
she'll only do it with me. Um, and but she has this other level of expression and she's a musician and she sings and plays guitar, so she's expressing it in other ways.
mm,
And she had a very, very deep level of grief because the year before my parents died, her best friend died of neuroblastoma, and she watched her fall apart. So, and it was like a family friend, and so she has layers and layers and layers of grief that I think she needs to express differently. I think she needs to get interested in, well, what is this when someone dies? How does somebody, she's kind of going at it at a different angle, but she's also doing fantastic now. I mean, it's not that people aren't, no one in the family is grieving. They are, but in their own separate ways. And they're letting it move through them. And I don't ever let them go too long, though, without reminding them about, oh, well, Pop and Mimi will be at this performance because they're going to love, they would be so happy, or this or that, and I'll often send them, once a month, I'll send them old photos or videos so they don't forget. I made them all books of just their time with my parents. So they
mm.
all have their singular books of like the family, but then just put photos of them with my parents. And who knows? I know my littlest looks at it a lot, but I don't know if my older two look, but they'll have it. It's there for them.
No, absolutely. And it's important to have that space, but also another thing that I love is the fact that, you make the time to communicate, which is always very, very important in order to keep the channels open and just check in with them and see where they're at and what's actually happening. So, that's just it's a lot. It's a lot.
A lot, especially when they're going into the teen years, because it's also that independent time.
Yeah.
They're starting to figure out who they are independently. And, it's behind closed doors a lot of times. And you're like, okay, well, how do I do this? But still remain like a fun mom, right? You still want to be like the mom that's like, let's have fun together, and yeah, it's a balance. It's really a balance.
No, it sounds like, it's a lot of balancing obviously has to happen, but what would you, because obviously in your business you're kind of helping people, so I'll stick to the human design coach because there's so many things that come under that.
Yeah.
How are you working with clients? What sort of things do you look out for, and what sort of people do you work with?
Yeah, so recently with human design, I noticed in a lot of my like Facebook groups for moms groups in the area, because I'm very connected, because for years I had my kids out and about, and I so often see parents, this is like across the board on all my mom's groups. I always see parents, they're like, my child is 6 or 7 and they're so frustrated. I need to go to the psychiatrist and get them ADHD drugs or ADD drugs. And I'm not, they don't go to sleep when I want them to go to sleep. Or I did this and they, and I've tried punishing my child, but it's not working. I need help. I need to have a therapist. And I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
And I was a therapist. I worked with the kids who had all kinds of issues. I worked with sexual trauma and DV and all this stuff. And across all of my years of working in the jail, I worked in the jail system with boys. I have only seen one kid who is truly ADHD, one kid who I could say, and I've worked with a lot of kids, that is something else. Like that is not what everyone else is having.
Yeah.
And yet all of these parents, these kids 4, 5, 6, 7, they want to get them diagnosed with ADHD. So I often am posting in there going, I think you should look at their human design because we are all oftentimes we forget how to parent. It's like we're just not parenting. We're parenting. I don't know. We just weren't parented well. So we have all this conditioning, right? So the human design helps you to decondition from all the conditioning that you grew up with. But also, when you know the charts of your kids, it makes such a difference because just knowing that. So, for an example, my 7-year-old, she has the hardest time going to sleep. And I'm a generator. Generators in human design, it's a type. We hit our head hits the pillow and we're asleep. It's like if we've used our energy, that's how it works. My 7-year-old is a manifester, and manifestors don't work that way. But so since my parents died, my 7-year-old has been sleeping in our bed until she's ready. And it's very frustrating when your 7-year-old comes to sleep with you, and I'm like head on the pillow. I'm like, oh, I'm already out, and she's up running around. Like she's talking to me and singing and doing all of these and telling stories. And I'm like, I need to sleep, right? So for years, I was like so frustrated. My husband would get very frustrated, right? But then when you learn about manifestors, you learn that it's not that they can't go to sleep. They just need 30 to 45 minutes of away time to start to decompress. And at the end of that 30 or 45 minutes, if they lay into bed, they will pass out like a generator. And when we started doing that, it was like all the tension at bedtime went away. No one went to bed frustrated. It was like this beautiful thing. Everyone got great sleep. And it was just by knowing your human design, right? And knowing that like certain types have different things like anger or frustration that tells you that they're off or something's happening. Instead of, a lot of times these moms on these groups say, oh, they're so angry or they're so frustrated, but they're such good kids other times during the day. And it's like, well, if in human design, depending on your type, that anger, that might be a manifester. And that manifester, you can't tell a manifester what to do, but you can ask them to inform you when they're doing something. And that is the key to teach. Like my 7-year-old now knows, okay, I'm going to go cut a tomato, just so you know. There's no way I can tell her no. But by informing me, I then can be there with her and teach her. And it's like it makes all the difference because it gives her all of what she needs,
Mhm.
right? And she's not feeling like she's okay to inform me now because she knows I'm not going to say no. I'm just going to make it safe. So
Yeah.
it's just like the way that when starting to understand your chart and your kid's chart can make all the difference
Yeah.
in parenting instead of giving your kid some medication for ADHD and getting them into therapy because it's like when you're 6 or 7 or 4, it's there's so much developing. There's
Yeah.
so much developing. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I've been working with human design a lot is parenting.
And what practical steps would you recommend to sort of other moms? Because there's loads of issues going on, but
Yeah.
just a few, practical things that they could sort of try to implement if they feel they're sort of being overwhelmed, if you like, and stressed out.
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, it's so easy to get a free human design chart. It's so easy to get a free human design chart and to do a little bit of the work yourself. Like I do sessions with people and they can ask me questions and we can, because there is more to it than just looking at your chart, but you can learn so much just from doing that. You can learn their type and their a strategy and authority. You can learn how they make decisions, what sleep is best, what foods are best, how to eat best, that kind of thing. So you can get a free I think it's even like freehumandesignchart.com is some place you can go to. It's geneticmatrix.com has a free charts for people. And just look it up and just do a little bit of research on both you and your kids because that will begin it. And in like a human design chart, if you look at it, you'll see that there are centers, it's a body graph that are colored and there's centers that aren't colored. And when you have centers that aren't colored, it means that you are open and you don't have access to that. So for example, in my house, we have three people who have open solar plexus centers, and that's your emotional center. And just knowing this is like crazy. But if you have an open emotional center, you're often like feeling other people's emotions. You don't have always access to your feelings, right? Or your emotions. So knowing, and two of my husband and my littlest have defined centers there. So when they come in, it's like everyone in the house feels what they're feeling. And if they and we all know now, okay, I'm all of a sudden I got really frustrated because my husband had a bad day at work, right? And we're all of a sudden everyone's at each other. And I'll go over and I'll be like, I'll say to my other two kids, It's daddy, don't worry about it. It's daddy. Just go back to what you were doing." And it's so helpful because they don't start to take on like, "Why I'm so angry." It's like they understand it now. And so it's like simple things like that. And if you have a child with a sacral authority, and if you look at your design, you can look at your strategy and authority. If it's sacral with a response, like this is a really simple thing to implement. That means that people need to ask yes or no questions. So like if I ask my daughter anything, and my oldest daughter, I'll be like, what do you want for dinner? She'll be like, I don't know. I'm also the same sacral. I don't know. I don't know what I want. I don't know. That's her biggest answer if I ask her a non yes or no question. But if I start to ask her yes or no questions that she can respond to, all of a sudden we have a relationship. I'm not being pushed off to the side. I'm not like, I don't know. She's like, yeah, I want salad. That's right. I'm like, do you want salad? Yeah. Do you want sushi? Yeah. No. And it's all of a sudden, okay, well, let's talk about it. And it becomes a conversation. So it really changes when you start to understand how your kids access that. It really changes. So go look up their charts, and see kind of just how you respond to each other. And that's a really great way to start. A second thing you can do is just when you get frustrated with your kids, sit back and say, "Oh, that's interesting. I'm frustrated. Why am I frustrated? Maybe it's not them." Like, maybe it's what happened? What triggered in me? Like all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, they're frustrated. Do I not like anger and frustration? Did I experience something when I was younger? And to get really curious with it. You can even play with curiosity and creativity. Start writing about it. Just, let it go. Take a break. While you're angry and frustrated, let it go for 30 minutes and just go write or draw or talk or have a conversation with a friend and be like, I'm really angry and frustrated right now, and I'm going to let it go and just get curious about what's happening there because oftentimes it is our conditioning. It's just like we were talking with the grief. My parents conditioned me not to feel sadness. So when my kids are feeling sad, what do I do? Right. Actually, I take the total opposite approach. And I'm like, tell me your sadness, I go like the whole other side of it, but I don't know if that's correct either, but just get curious. Be like, that's interesting. Is it really my 4-year-old that's having some kind of like problem that I need to, is she really trying to hurt me or, what is going on? And, sometimes the best thing to do is to, in the language that your kids use, to ask them. So for my littlest, some of the language, at least in her human design, is I'm wondering how you feel about that. Like, I wonder how you feel. I wonder, that's the big words, right? So that's for like an emotional authority. And so, but with my older ones, I know I can immediately, so like with my older daughter, I know she speaks through art. So if she's having a bad time, I might be like, hey, can you show me your latest sketch? Like, I just kind of want to see it. Right. And I'll see, I get curious because it's too often we as parents judge. There was a great quote. Oh my gosh. The other day I was doing a reading. I'm going to see if I have it. Yeah, there's a great quote by Ernest Hemingway. It was something I did in a writing class recently on Insight Timer. As a writer, and you could take this for anything in your life, but this is the quote. As a writer, you should not judge, you should understand. Right. And I think you could write as a parent, you should not judge, you should understand. You should strive to understand. You should get curious. You should be like, oh, I got to know. Like, this is like, sit back and look at like the energy that's going through a tantrum. Like, that is amazing. When you have a kid totally in a tantrum, the amount of energy that's being used in that moment, sit back and be like, wow, part of you could probably use that kind of energy in your life, right? Like there's so much curiosity, but we go towards judgment. Like, oh, I must have done something wrong. or they don't like this, or they don't like that, or right. So that's how I think that would be my first.
So, Jocelyn, you've mentioned so much stuff, and to be honest, I wasn't aware of the human design chart, and I'm definitely going to be checking it out myself and checking it out for my whole gang. So, I've got 5 children myself, and then my husband as well. So it's going to be pretty fun to do.
Yeah.
For the audience benefit, obviously, you work with various people. I'm assuming you work with anybody from all over,
I
not in the States.
yeah, I do. I work online, but also in person. So I do both. And and yeah. I actually it's amazing these days how much you can do online across like I mean in on Insight Timer, a lot of my people are in other countries that follow me. And so I think it's so interesting to see where everyone's from. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so cool.
No, I think it makes it so much easier. And to be honest, it's giving people that choice, and you can work with anybody from anywhere. So, where can people find you? Any guests listening in that feel they would benefit working with you and having a chat with you, where can they find you?
Yeah. You can always schedule time with me on jocelynbates.net. And I have a link to my Insight Timer there as well because I do a bunch of live events
Mm.
and such for Insight Timer. And there you can schedule like Akashic sessions with me or human design charts and soul art sessions and journeys. So it's all there. And then I have a Substack where I actually talk about my grief journey, and that's you can find me as Jocelyn Bates on Substack. And on Insight Timer, it's the same, my name. And I have a bunch of free tracks for Yoga Nidra for anyone who's going through grief. And even for, I haven't put a bunch up for kids, but that's where I'm moving next to do a bunch of kid Yoga Nidras and meditations. But it's just good for any mom because we all have those moments where our nervous system is like, I can't take this right now.
Yeah.
To get it down and balance it. Um, yeah, and then I have a Instagram that's Soul Sessions by Jocelyn. So you can find me around and about.
Quite a few places. And
Yeah.
what would you say is, just the last sort of tip for any listeners, before they even think of working with anybody like yourself? What kind of things could they implement just in the meantime? Because I know, not everybody is on ground level. Everybody's kind of like, we all have different things happening at different times of our lives, but any bit of
Yeah.
advice for them.
Yeah, I think it really does. Like I started with saying I'm a cultivator of curiosity and creativity, and I think it really does start with getting curious. And it really starts with getting curious with yourself, your reactions, who you are, why you're here, what your connection is, and just starting to, when you start to get curious, like start to pull up a habit of some kind of creativity, even if it's like writing, even if it's like the most non-creative writing. Like you literally, one of the best things I've started doing, and it clears my mind so beautifully and helps me sleep better, is at night, I have like a circle and I go backwards through my day. So I don't have to hold on to anything when I go to sleep at night. So it's like as if you could make it almost like hourly if you wanted to.
Mm.
But I literally write down just the main things that are in my head about my day before I go to sleep.
Mm.
And it allows me to sleep better. Like just that, right? And that's not creative at all. That's like, okay, what did I think about today? What did I do? What did I, and I'm going to let go of it all. But it is creative in the sense that you're putting a pen to paper
Mm.
and you are preparing yourself for sleep. So even something that simple can be like a major, just if you get a more restful sleep because your brain isn't like, oh my God, I did this today and I did that today. And sometimes I even write down my list for tomorrow just so I don't have to think about it. So I can just go to that list of what I need to do. And that's just, it's like a simple way to do it, but just getting curious, like, well, who am I? And why do I respond this way? And what do I need? What am I missing? Any way you can get curious, writing, conversations with friends, and going back to that main quote, like, don't judge, want to understand, right? Just instead of, and it's so hard because we all judge ourselves so much. And maybe even the first thing to do is to look at who your judge is, who your watcher at the gates is, who is your inner critic, and what are they telling you so that you're aware when it happens the next time. We all have it. There's not one person alive who doesn't have an inner critic. And anyone who tells you so, they're lying. We all have it. We all have it. So maybe even just getting to know your inner critic, the person that judges internally inside of you. Who is it? You know, and just beginning to get curious, just get curious. I really feel like that's what, in the end, transformations and the transformations you're looking for, whether they're as a mom, as a woman, as a a daughter, whatever it is, or as a professional, whatever transformations you're looking for, I actually think it's much simpler than people say it is. I think it's really just about getting curious. It's an individual journey, you know, and just getting curious and being a little creative with it and honoring your body, knowing that your body is the conduit for everything. So start paying attention to it, how it feels, what you think, what impulses you have, and you will find the transformations that you want.
Wow, that's so powerful, because I think a lot of us do that, where you go to bed and you've got 50 million thoughts in your head, and it's such a simple thing. To be honest, I'm guilty of that.
Well, with 5 kids, you have to have a lot going on.
But like what you said about writing, that's what I do. I just put everything down. I diarize everything, because I don't want to have to think. So even my day, I know what's happening, because otherwise, with the
Yeah.
amount of things I have to take care of, I need to know what I'm doing.
Yes. And that takes up space in our body, like in our energy. Like, who wants that? I have like 5 different calendars that I fill out. So anywhere I look, I'm like, oh, that's what I need. Okay.
Oh no, I have one. That's enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I
yeah.
mean, it's amazing when you start to release that grasp on you and it's just outside of yourself, how much space that can actually give you.
Mhm. No, absolutely. And you've been absolutely brilliant. And I'm sure the audience are going to take quite a lot of the tips from what you've said. When your episode goes live, I will add the links to where they can connect with you from. So if anybody would like to work with Jocelyn, the links will be available along with the episode, where you can listen and take on some of the tips as well before you enlist any help if you need some support or anything. But it's been absolutely wonderful having you on the show, Jocelyn. And
Oh, thank you for having me.
you're very welcome. Thank you so much.